Interesting thing about these two players, these are the players that didn't bring Skellige and didn't bring Nilfgaard. So every other player has Skellige and Nilfgaard. Hannah-chan opting not to bring Nilfgaard and Colemon opting not to bring Skellige.
We'll see what faction or who made the better decision in this matchup here. We have the King Foltest Mirror, which might happen at some point. Great Swords, of course, is a deck that Hannah-chan has been playing for many tournaments, and a deck that I think everyone on ladder and in the tournament scene and in esports in general with Gwent knows very well. It's a very powerful deck, tier 1, and I think it's Hannah-chan's real, I think the most positive deck he's brought here in this matchup specifically.
I think the deck that is going to be most interesting to see from Hannah-chan is that Dagon. Deathwish, this is the only Dagon in the tournament, and Deathwish is a deck that some players really love and some players absolutely hate. So I think that's going to be one of the decks that it'll be interesting to see how Hannah-chan chooses to pilot that deck. With that said, he's on blue coin, and he does have the option of that dry pass that we did see yesterday.
I think this is very beneficial for Colemon. He is on red coin, has the upper hand in this first match. He did get the lucky coin flip in his favor, so he'll have 3 red coins if this goes to a game 5. And I think this is the dream, first game matchup for Colemon. I think he was predicting the blue coin Dagon that we saw yesterday as well with Hannah-chan when he played against House of Cards. And in this case, he opened up with Foltest, which I think is great as a red coin deck. And he could have done either Foltest really or Alchemy. I think Foltest is better suited against Dagon though.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with Hannah-chan whether he chooses to adapt his strategy of dry passing on the blue coin, seeing that he's up against Foltest, or whether he chooses to continue it. With that said, the Foltest deck doesn't have a spy, so that's why it's typically run on red coin, is you don't have that spy. So if you're on the blue coin, you can start to lose card advantage, and that can be problematic. So it's going to be interesting to see how these players choose to basically play out this first round.
I think we'll see a similar blue coin dry pass from Hannah-chan. It makes sense, especially against a deck that can brick, has the commandos, has a lot of thinning that has to be done ideally in round 1. And in this case, Colemon can potentially brick and potentially go into the mulligan phase in round 2 at a big disadvantage and not be able to prep for round 3 and have to play obviously into round 2 to set up his finishers like Dijkstra, for example, for the short round 3. And of course, I mean, Foltest doesn't really have an engine play going into a long round, whereas Hannah-chan has a ton of arcs. Never mind, he's going to go and play into this round.
Yeah, opting to play into this first round. And it's interesting to see the players adapt their strategy. Arcaspore on the board, that is an engine that is going to be starting to tick points, and it does move between rows. So it might be tricky for Colemon necessarily to find the value in his trebuchets if units don't line up.
And like you said before, we see Hannah-chan does have a spy, so he does have, if he does win this round, he has a chance to bleed round 2 and really have control of the length of round 3 as well, and what cards he wants to keep and what cards he wants to bleed from his opponent. And we see a very, obvious opening from Colemon. Going to start thinning out these commandos, making sure not to brick his hand later on, and just creating this huge Temerian synergy that helps propel so many of his units forward.
Yeah, those commandos, the blue stripes are also crewmen, which means that they do power up the machines in Colemon's hand. So it's sometimes something that players choose to deal with. And Hannah-chan, you can see actually choosing the fog. He wants to go long in this round.
And it's an early fog because you don't really have too much power on that row. You do have the chance that commandos do spawn on random rows, so they could jump straight into that fog party as well and potentially give Hannah-chan points. But I think it's important also, we saw commandos being thinned and commandos possibly breaking your hand. It's the same with foglets. Hannah-chan is running 2 foglets, and he can potentially break his hand if he doesn't bring those out early. The
thing also with commandos is they don't go to a set row. They go on a random row, so it'll be interesting to see how they spread out with this fog. With that said, Hannah-chan does have his Frightener. His Frightener can be used to pull units into the same row, and he can also play that into the fog. So this may be indicative that Hannah-chan wants to use that spy round 1.
Yeah, it definitely looks like that's going to be the line of play here. Also, you're just really wasting the fog because there won't be any units play there, unless, like you said, the random commandos jump into there. And I think the Arcspore and the Fog Ticks are both really important as well in blocking the point synergy with the Temerian synergy. It's just going to block a few units from getting those points as soon as you start playing more scouts. And it seems like little, but it's a few points here and there, and it might matter in the end.
Yeah, the engines of Deathwish are what make it powerful. It's a bit of a slow starter, a slow burner, but as time goes on, those points are going to start to matter. And with 2 Arcaspores on the board, and Colemon not really having great options to deal with them other than Roche and Selkirk, which are spending gold cards, it's going to be interesting to see whether Colemon decides to remove these or save that removal for the Dow.
And Colemon has a dream hand. We've seen, a ton of gold. We see the Reaver Scout already out, so there's no chance in that getting bricked. We saw it in a few games yesterday with House of Cards just Henselt. And really, I think he has a great hand. He has Raw and Bait as well, and just all 4 gold in hand is always a good thing. Because sometimes you get unlucky, you don't draw your Dijkstra, you don't draw, your Selkirk, which are cards that provide a huge power spike in round 3, for example. And having them secured in round 1 is always, I think, pretty, most of the time a pretty good advantage.
I think that's true. We see the Frightener coming out there, trying to utilize that fog and pulling the blue stripe in there and kind of disrupting that little pocket of crewmen.
Yeah, you disrupt the crewman pocket, you get the points from the fog as well, and you say, Colamon, if you play too much into this round, I'm going to get a passive 4 points per turn, maybe 5 I play a third Arc Spore, and you might be in trouble, maybe not right now, but in a few turns, if you don't pass, you might be in trouble.
And I think this is the point where Colamon, he's going to have to kind of start considering that pass. But if he takes the pass, he then gives up all of these crewmen that he's played. So his machines then become a little bit weaker. And for Hana-chan, having units in the graveyard isn't such a problem because, yes, those Archospores are in the graveyard, but he does have options to resurrect them and get them back on the board in the future.
You will have the Raw for later as well. That is a crewman that does come back again and again. So you have that, at least that one synergy that you'll have pretty much guaranteed. We see it played now. It's always good to play Raw round 1 because it returns round 2 and round 3, unless your opponent has, an artifact compression. But Hana-chan is not playing that. He is playing a Mandrake instead in this list.
Yeah, we see Colamon stretching out that gap between himself and Hana-chan. But Hana-chan is getting 4 points per turn. Each Archospore ticking for a point each, the fog ticking for 2. So while the gap may seem pretty big, 21 points, it's not as big as it seems if this round goes on.
At this point, both players are just setting up their graveyard, setting up their thinning, setting up their cards for the most powerful round 3 as possible. Really, you can have control of round 1, and also there's no carryover in play, so it won't matter as much either.
The question here is, what do you choose to target? You can kill the Archospore and get a random 4 hit, or you've got 4 strength targets. You could use the 4 strength targets to kill the 2 strength blue stripe and deny a crewman, but then you're wasting a little bit of value on that damage. I think he's hoping for an Archospore tick there.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal to get the Cyclops so early, but obviously the Foglet was not an option really. You want to thin the Foglet out through the fog usage with Vadermaker and also Dagon. So maybe a bit unfortunate, maybe what he was expecting, maybe a Griffin or a Dow even, the second Dow that he does have in his deck. But in that case, he did get the Cyclops instead. He was able to thin a bit though, the Recon does help with that, but maybe not the optimal play that Hana-chan was hoping for.
I don't think so. And a slight problem for Colamon is he's not getting the units lined up to start utilizing those trebuchets. And the thing is, if he doesn't manage to use them this round, the subsequent rounds, there's going to be fewer and fewer cards in play. These trebuchets are great in a long round because that's when the units start to get stacked up on the rows. But because of the Archospores moving every time, there's no stacking happening. They're just kind of jumping here and there, and you're only ever seeing 2 units next to each other.
I wanted to note Colomon's the only player that brought trebuchets in full test. We do hear a pass there from Colamon, so he says, I had enough attrition, there's been 4 points every turn. I might be in trouble, 2 or 3 turns from now I'm going to pass now that I have the chance. And he does give control of the bleed in round 2 to Hana-chan. Hana-chan will be able to go for a longer round 3 if he so desires that. And he kind of mitigates the burst power from cards like DJ, cards like Selkirk as well.
I think this is interesting for Hana-chan because with Hana-chan in control, Deathwish does have some options for some big point plays, whereas full test, you do have the Shani and you can kind of resurrect things, but with Hana-chan in control, he can choose, how much he wants to push Colamon. And with Colamon not having the option of a spy, he can't really regain any sort of card difference.
Sick Commando there from Colamon will go for the direct mulligan. He does still have infantry in his deck, so that is still an option where you could brick if you draw 2 of them. You want to thin those out at some point. Stennis can help with that. Could be a very nice tempo swing, especially with a commando still left in your deck as well.
But we do see the She-Troll of Vergen on the side of Hana-chan. So those Temerians, they line up on a row, they stack up on a row. She-Troll usually used to play a Rot Fiend. Rot Fiend, She-Troll will consume the Deathwish unit that she pulls from the deck. So when she consumes the Rot Fiend, it damages everything on the opposing row. So if Colamon's rows are stacked, which typically you do when you're playing a full test style of deck, then Hana-chan's going to see a lot of value.
Now we see Hana-chan going straight for the long round. The Deathwish really, that's what it excels in. You have the Fog still available. You have Deathmold, of course, to answer back from Colamon. But generally, I think Hana-chan does have the edge in the long round. You have to be careful not to brick. There are many options. You can brick the She-Troll. You can brick the Dagon if you draw the Foglet. You can even brick the Wispa's Tribute if you somehow draw, 2 silver cards. So, and also the Slizzard could be bricked. But in general, I think Hana-chan knows where he has to mulligan and what risk he can take. Foglet is still in the deck, so I think Hana-chan will have to play it safe here and not mulligan. Of course, you could risk it for the biscuit and maybe try and he goes for it, gets the Griffin instead, which is okay.
Yeah, I think with these kind of risky plays, some players, they do choose to kind of play it safe, and some players, they're more keen to take those risks. I think it depends on how confident they are in the matchup, and this kind of tells me that Hana-chan feels like he needs, everything he can to win this. He does have Archospores, he's got access to Resurrects from his graveyard, but the weather isn't going to do much with Deathmold sitting in the hand of Colamon.
And also Mandrake in this matchup doesn't really do much. There isn't too much of a boost being done by Colamon. You can Mandrake your own units in round 2, round 3, but there wasn't a bleed done from Hanachan. Didn't have the chance to then res the Deathwish units with the Brewis Ritual. In this case, not an option for that. So Mandrake, in this current matchup, it is a silver card, but it'll be probably worse than the Griffin. So the Griffin was the better mulligan there.
That is true. We do see Gales in the side of hand of Hanachan, and that's going to give Hanachan access to Triss Telekinesis or the Whisper's Tribute, I believe. So he can use that to then get access to the Monster's Nest.
And there we see Colamon with a very reactive hand, and you have to play Battering Ram on an empty board because he did lose round 1, has to go first in round 3, which is the kind of the disadvantage of giving up the round 1. You don't have last say, and you also have to play proactively. And with a deck that has, Death Mold, has a ton of cards that you might, and especially like Stennis into infantry, you could get it, but you could also get a commando. So it's risky.
Yeah, and I think that is maybe part of why Hanachan did opt to play into that round 1, because by playing into that round 1, he's forcing Colamon to go first in round 3. Whereas if he'd passed, he'd have to then win round 2 and then go first again in round 3. So it gives him a little bit of edge in this round.
And here's Hanachan. You can see some Thunders coming down on these Arc Spores right now and get rid of them, at least one of them for now. I think you do have to save, and the Vernon Roche as well. You have to save the Death Mold for the Weather Clear. I think he knows, he obviously knows that Dagon is available. It is a leader after all. But these Arc Spores, one or two of them might go, especially with the Vader Maker and also the Vernon Roche as removal options.
Yeah, Colamon does actually have a lot of options to remove Hanachan's engines. The Arcaspores, they only have 7 points. They can be beat down, they can be zapped down. Death Mold and Vader Maker both having access to that Alza's Thunder. We also do see the Selkirk, which will duel an opponent. So Hanachan's going to have to be very careful that he finds value in these Griffins.
I'll have to try his best also to not get rid of these silver cards that will be on the board for this round 3, because both, Death Mold and Vader Maker are great Shawnee targets if you want to res them from the graveyard. So I think he's definitely going to try and hope that Arc Spores don't end up killing those silver cards that have generally more value on average than the bronze cards, like the Battering Ram, for example.
That is true. I think what's also going to be interesting in this matchup is the Dijkstra. You see the 4-point gold in the hand of Colamon, because when that gets played on Hanachan's side of the board, 2 cards will come out of Colamon's deck. But you know what cards we haven't seen in Colamon's deck yet? Temerian Infantry.
And that's a big tempo swing. It seems like there's just bronze cards, but when they come out all together and buffed as well, it really is a big tempo swing for a bronze card.
I really like this use of Fog by Colamon. With the number of turns left, he's going to see good value in that because the Arcaspores move. Whilst Hanachan might not stack into that row, he doesn't have a choice if the Arcaspores end up landing in that row as they move every single turn. So it's actually quite likely that Colamon is going to see more than the 9 points of value out of the Vader Maker.
And still not a row. There isn't a row that's populated enough for Hanachan to commit the Fog just yet, I think, especially if he knows that Death Mold's going to clear it anyway. He wants to probably commit to a row that doesn't already have a damage unit like the Battering Ram, so he'll probably go front row at some point, but I think he knows that Death Mold is going to be a pretty fast answer to that Fog. And until he has to maybe, start playing cards that might thin out the Fog by accident, he won't play the Dagon, really.
That's fair to say. I think Dagon, with this sort of Fog, it's not necessarily going to be giving him the engine value in the same way as these Arcaspores. If they start dying, he's not going to be seeing that engine value. But the thing is with Colamon, he now has to decide whether he wants to kill that Dow. And that's one of these things where if you think your opponent has another one, then maybe killing it isn't the right answer. If you think your opponent has a Slizzard, putting it in the graveyard's actually playing into their strategy. So it's going to be interesting to see with Colamon how he decides to play this, because there's so many removal options in his hand.
I believe there was one Dow already played, and the players do have each other's deck lists, and I think there are definitely only 2 Dows in Hanachan's list. So Colamon might be going towards that strategy, maybe not right now, maybe saving that Death Mold, for example, for the Weather Clear, like we said earlier, for Dagon. But yeah, right away I think Hanachan has to take advantage of this Dow still being available and take advantage of that Griffin synergy immediately, because it's a ton of points.
Yeah, he's seen what happens when there's no Griffin targets in the past. We saw him in yesterday's games actually just playing a Griffin as a set of points, as a 9-point play, just to kind of stall out the game. But here, when you do have that Dow target, that gives you a lot of points. That's a 17-point play.
And Slizzard can still target a Cyclops. Only 1 has been played, so there is still 1 more left in the deck for the Slizzard. And like we said before, Gales will probably hit either Triss Telekinesis or Whisper's Tribute. I believe it will be probably Whisper's Tribute into Monster's Nest, into Ghoul, into that Frightener that is on Colamon's graveyard, which will be, a massive tempo swing at the very end.
That's true, but the question is it going to be more tempo than the Dijkstra if the Dijkstra finds Temerian Infantry?
It'll be close. I mean, you have the She-Troll into the Rotfiend as well once the Temerians come out. Dagon still hasn't been played. Double Weather is an intense strategy from Coleman. I think he knows there is no weather clear from Hanachan. And Dagon finally does come out a bit late, but now that Death Mold is down, it makes sense because he knows that it's not going to get contested.
Yeah, as soon as you see that, you answer, and this equates to the same thing as the rain. So by doing that, he's effectively nullified the rain. Actually, I think that the Coleman, with the marching in orders in hand, I believe that may be targeting Temerians. It really depends on how boosted they are and whether he's thinned all of his battering rams. But it could be the option that when he plays that, no, we don't see it.
And that is a tempo swing we were talking about. Absolutely massive. 18 points from just bronze cards. You kind of risk it with the mulligans. You can get bricked, but overall, if you play it well, I think it's a card you definitely have to include, obviously, in the Temerian package. The Griffin's uncontested, hitting at Dow, creating a lot of points, and it's still really close. 3 cards each, only 7 points separating, and still fog ticking for both sides.
Yeah, we've got weather ticking, but the Arcaspores are on the side of Hanachan. So Hanachan, he does have that extra edge, although when an Arcaspore lands in the fog, he loses it. So it's going to be a little bit interesting to see how these engines play out and how these Arcaspores move in order to impact the outcome of this game.
And the DJ really has to pull it through here because Hanachan has a very powerful hand left. Gil's into Wispa's Tribute. Sheetroll into Rotfiend on that front row is going to be quite massive, even though there is a bit of armor as well. But here comes Dijkstra into the fog. Those 4 points don't mean anything for Hanachan's side of the board. And right away we see 2 cards coming down. A little bit of luck here, but hopefully Coleman, hopefully for him, he gets a bit of a lucky pull here. The deck is quite thin though, so he does get the Trebuchet. Decent amount of points with the Romvid synergy for the crewman.
What's it going to be? This is intense and a battering ram.
So, I mean, 2 bronze cards, but still quite a bit of value. Big tempo swing there, and Coleman takes the lead once again, and also populates that range row with the Dijkstra.
Yeah, and we can see with his positioning, he's no longer kind of stacking into that fog. He doesn't really want the Rotfiend, if it comes out, to be any more powerful than it is. Hanachan does have that Slizzard though, and the Slizzard into the Cyclops onto the Dow, that's a pretty decent play as well.
At this point, I think Hanachan knows he won't get any more points from the Rotfiend. Coleman will play around it by playing into the range row with his remaining 2 units. And he knows that he's just doing the math now to see if the armor, if it's still beneficial to play in the front row, which is more populated, but there are units with armor there, or if it's beneficial to play in the back row.
I think the back row is better.
The 6 has 5 armor, so even if you do ping it off and the weather pings it later, it's still going to be, it's still going to eat most of those points.
Yeah, and the thing with Sheetroll is it doesn't matter where you place her, it matters where you play the Rotfiend. So it pulls the Rotfiend, it eats the Rotfiend, gaining its power, and then we see the damage on the opposite row there, and swinging things 53 to 52 currently. This is
still very close.
This is a nail biter. It kind of comes down to, what does marching orders pull at this point?
See, the deck is really thin down for Coleman. There is a very late scout coming out here. Not going to be the biggest tempo swing, but still, a decent 9 points there. I think the Gils will be coming out first to give the Selkirk a bit of a worse dueling target if it does go for the Ghoul. Obviously, the Cyclops would be the perfect target, so Slizzard into Cyclops wouldn't be optimal played right now. I think he'd rather, and obviously the Arcspore as well, you want it to tick for 1 extra turn, so Gils will probably come down first.
It's true. I think what's also interesting is with the armor on the side, we actually saw an Arcaspore ping the armored unit, and these points matter in this kind of game. We've seen how close these things kind of can come down to, and I think with this matchup, it's really coming down to the wire, and it's very difficult at this stage to call who has it with so many points, being ticked down from weather, from Arcaspores, what happens with Gales. All of these things add up.
And Hanachan taking the Wispa's Tribute, you're going to go for an absolutely massive play. Monsters Nest, a great synergy here. Probably going to go for the Ghoul into the Frightener, I believe, would be the best option. He's going to maybe look at the Rotfiend, but I think that this would be definitely the best option. You do have the Activator with Cyclops, but he does go for he eats the Rotfiend instead. So he's waiting for the Cyclops, obviously, for the Slizzard synergy. He cannot consume it, or else the Slizzard would not be dead, but it wouldn't be in an ideal position. And it's going to be really close here. Weather's still ticking on both boards. Selkirk, a great value card here.
Yeah, having that 13-point unit to target does give him a lot of value there, and he has taken that off the board. Oh, it's so close. 52 to 67. Is the Cyclops going to be enough?
Cyclops going to be, and we have to see the weather ticks and the Arcspore ticks as well. The weather will be hitting armor on the side of Coleman, so that weather will not be doing any damage on that infantryman that does still have 2 armor left. We have 4 pings of weather on Hanachan's side.
I don't think it's quite enough for Hanachan. It's going to be awfully close. You see him killing the down, that then turns into the 2 4/4s, and taking the 1 point.
It might just be enough. That's going to be the Arcspore ticking as well. Only going to be 4 points of damage on Hanachan's side, and Hanachan will take it by just 4 points, but just enough to clutch the win there. And that was very close. Especially with the kind of the Ghoul wasn't perfect, 13 points only, and also gave Selkirk a perfect target to duel.
Yeah, and I think Hana-chan, he timed those rounds really well by playing into that first round. He got the win that he needed, and then from that, then he went into the long round and managed to utilize his engines. And Coleman, he has those trebuchets, but we really didn't see a good showing from them.
And Coleman losing on red coin against that Dagon, I think, was not what he had in mind. I think that was definitely not his plan coming into this series. Losing your first game on red coin with a deck that you thought was definitely favored. I talked to him earlier. He thought that was the opening he had to do. He got it exactly what he wanted. Hana-chan did queue up with Dagon, but in the end, just not enough. Hana-chan, I think he timed it really well. The passes and just the control of round 1 and the dry pass round 2 for the very long round 3.
And Hana-chan now on that red coin, and see him opting to play his crack and crate list. Although we have been seeing full test a lot on red, but Hana-chan is gone for crack.
And Coleman is on blue coin, but Viper Witchers against Greatswords. I mean, that is a great answer. I mean, you're not targeting Greatswords in with Coleman's decks, but you do have a great matchup here with the Viper Witchers at least. Being able to take care of the Greatswords really well.
Yeah, and we see 3 Viper Witchers in the hand of Coleman, plus the Vilgefortz. You can often opt to use that offensively depending on how things work out. So we'll kind of see how Coleman chooses to play this, but Hana-chan's going to have a hard time establishing his board.
And Coleman not seeing enough gold. I think he would have liked to see a few more golds maybe. Only Vilgefortz there, which is, I mean, it's okay. Hana-chan in this case with Coral. Coral not the greatest card, I think, in this matchup either. There isn't really a very, very tall unit, unless you start getting, some of these cards that get boosted by the Ales and the Swallows that could be good targets for the Coral. So we'll see if Hana-chan finds good value there.
I agree with you. I think it kind of comes down to how the Mahakam Ales land, whether Coral is going to see value. But we'll definitely see Coleman putting those Swallow Potions onto gold cards if he can, because gold cards are not targetable by Coral.
And that's a great opening from Coleman. His leader basically became Dandelion Poet. He played the Cantarella for only 8 points, and he has a great target for Viper Witchers as well to start playing those cards out and also populating the graveyard for round 2 and 3.
That's true, and it's not something that Hana-chan's going to like to see that spy straight off the bat. He's opting to play his crack and crate and pull out one of those ships because all of the Greatswords and Jenga are in his hand. We see the ship get pulled instead, strengthened, which means that the Corsairs are going to see a little bit more value.
And Coleman, I believe, only has 10 alchemy cards in his deck, so that will not be able to kill a longship in one go. We saw Bemorki's playing with 11 cards, so he could be able to kill this longship, for example, and a few other cards that are at 11 points. But in this case, Coleman going for a bit of a different list and missing one Swallow Potion. He has one less Swallow Potion that might just, be, a very deciding thing in his deck, because killing this longship right now would be really, really great.
It would, but it's going to be difficult for him. And looking at his hand, he does, although he has those Witchers, he does have a lot of special cards in hand. He's got 2 ointments that currently hold no value to him. He's got a Swallow Potion and an Ale, and those are cards that you typically want to be thinning from your deck with the Vic of Varro Novices. They're not really things that you usually aim to play from hand.
At this point, Mandrake could be used later in the round if he does find it with Vilgefortz, for example, but not being able to kill that ship is definitely not ideal.
No, this is exactly what Coleman didn't want to happen. And the thing with Hana-chan is he was quite fortunate in that the crack and crate went onto the ship because of his starting hand. And this is one of those things in Gwent, like if you can get your engines going, it's going to be very hard for Coleman to catch up. And you don't necessarily need both Greatswords and boats. As we saw yesterday, Hana-chan managed to overcome House of Cards using just the boats.
We'll see where Coleman decides to use the power from these Viper Witchers. He has a limited amount of uses, obviously with the Viper Witchers being played for the first time and then res from the graveyard with the ointments. And he has to do a lot of killing, because it's not only Greatswords, it's the ships as well that can add up a lot of points in a long round.
And I don't think at this stage, with the state of his hand, he really has enough. He did have to invest one of those Viper Witchers onto Cantarella, which isn't something you necessarily want to kill. It's a great target because you're getting maximum value, but you want to be killing these boats. You want to be killing these Greatswords. And Hana-chan just continues to develop his board.
I think in the end, he's going to let Hana-chan get a few more points this turn and deny the finisher points in the Greatswords for round 3, really. That's where it really matters. If these Greatswords die, they won't be getting their points, won't be strengthening, and you'll have a much weaker round 3 finisher from Hana-chan with he's played with his Freyas or Sigrifa, for example. So I think Coleman knows this. His main target is going to be the Greatswords instead of the ships. Going to give Hana-chan more points now to deny points later on.
But I think he's playing a risky game because it's very difficult here, because if he passes, Coleman then wins and he's in control of round 2. So he can choose whether he wants a long round 2 or a short round 2. And with these longer rounds, if he can develop those boats, it doesn't matter whether or not the Greatswords are big, because if he's developed boats, he's got the value on the board.
And we'll see time is one of the biggest resources for these greatswords in this greatswords deck, really. I mean, every 2 turns you get 6 points, and if you can deny these greatswords from growing, you have to res them again or play another one again. You're just shortening the game by 1 round every single time, and that's really what matters here against Hannah-chan.
But he is running out of denial, so this round can't go on too long, and with not really great options for the boats unless he wants to, utilize the Witchers. But I think you're better to focus on either greatswords or boats. There's still points being gained every turn, and Hannah-chan, he knows how to pilot these engine decks. We saw that in the last game. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Colemon can overcome the power of Hannah-chan's engines.
I think he just has to stall at this point. Just keep on killing these greatswords. You can play out his maybe lesser value cards like the Macam Ale. He has every row populated. Maybe the Swallow Potion as well. As long as he doesn't stray too far away in points from Hannah-chan, where Hannah-chan can get a very, very favorable pass. He might end up giving up this round. I think just the long ships ticking and no denial for those long ships every single turn. Even without greatswords, it's going to be a lot of points over a 10-turn round 1. So Colemon at this point just stalling for time and trying to deny these greatswords as best as possible.
Yeah, and I think it is very difficult. He's actually opted then to play the last Witcher and clear that greatsword again. Hannah-chan, however, still in the lead. Utilizing that Dandelion Poa actually stopped him, I believe, from being in a tie situation at this point because he put those extra 5 points on the board. It also puts it in the graveyard for his renew. So I did really like that extra tempo with the Poa. And
Coral being hover there, Coral being played for not the greatest amount of value. We said it earlier on. In this matchup, you could find more value if Ale is played early, and you can find a great Ale target on one of these bronze units. But in this case, only 9 points there. Not the greatest target. We've seen much better targets, but in general in this matchup, Coral won't be the best gold card.
And I quite like it because by using it now, you're denying the Resurrect. This Viper Witcher is no longer going to the graveyard, which means if Hannah-chan then chooses for a second long round, Colemon may have too many ointments and not enough Viper Witchers. So I actually, although it's not the greatest play in terms of points, I like the graveyard denial that Hannah-chan utilized there.
Not only that, you're also enabling the renew for later on. If a pass does come in soon and you want to dry pass in round 2, you have to play Coral round 3, and then unless your opponent kills it, which I don't think Colemon would do, knowing Hannah-chan's deck list, you'll have to go into a renew Dandelion instead, where Coral might in some situations be the better option for round 3 if you see a long round with Ales and Swallow Potions being played.
Yeah, I also really like it because it gives him options on his Renew. He doesn't have to go Poet. And this is the thing with Renew, is it's a risky card in that if you don't get your golds into your graveyard, it can be dead. But on the flip side, if you have plenty of golds in your graveyard, it gives you a lot of choice. And having options in tournament settings is something that players really love. It's why we see things like Vader Maker and like Death Mold and that, cards which give you choice. Triss Telekinesis is another one, because you can often find the thing that you need for the situation.
We see Colemon, no medic in his deck list, which would be a great little tech card, tech bronze card. We already missed the one Swallow Potion, but no medic here, so he can't really steal a greatsword in round 3 either, which would have been ideal. And I see Colemon, he can deal with his greatsword. He doesn't want it to buff up. He wants it to stay at 8, so he passes. And I think that's the correct option. He stalled the round 1 as much as he could when he's out of Viper Witches without them being in the graveyard, so he can't use Ointment. He decided to pass instead, and he gives up the round, which I think is not a crazy thing. I think that's what a lot of people expect from Alchemy there, especially on blue coin.
For sure, but we do see Udalryk appearing in the hand of Hannah-chan. So Hannah-chan, he's got choice into this round. Typically, when players want to regain a card, they just pass here. But with the Udalryk, he can choose to play into this round if he wants to, and see if he can maybe set up a Jenga finisher, although he doesn't have the Sigadriffer for the Resurrect.
But against Alchemy, Alchemy has a very powerful burst in round 3 and a very short one. Greatswords does as well, but if all your Greatswords are denied, it becomes a lot harder. Obviously, Hannah-chan can start trying to bleed here, but as soon as he gives your opponent, 13 points with a spy, playing for points doesn't make as much sense, especially where Colemon does draw into the Mandrake, for example, so the long ship, at least one of them is going to be completely, destroyed at this point. So I think Colemon is in a bit of a favorable position. Also playing the Guardian allows him to mess with Hannah-chan's draws later on as well, so
Yeah, it really messes with the Udalryk, because Udalryk, typically you get, 2 choices from the top of your deck. But if on the top of your deck there is the little golem, then, that's not something you're ever going to want to pick. It's a 6 point, so it kind of forces you into taking the other choice. However, by doing that, it does mean that the golem gets discarded. Udalryk, he discards the card that you don't pick, and discarding the golem is great because then you can't draw it again. So it's kind of there's a silver lining, but it's not maybe the best situation for an Udalryk.
A Sire might be played this round as well. It's a card that has a lot of uses, very versatile, but one of its most known uses is putting Roach back into your deck. And at only 11 points, it's not the biggest tempo play, so being able to play it while you're being bled in round 2 is sometimes a very positive thing to do. And maybe not right now. Colomon's going to wait a bit. Maybe try and play some Viper Witchers here to get rid of that long ship and make sure that he can kill 1 with Mandrake, but he can't kill 2. So we're going to try and keep that under control so the points aren't too much in Hannah-chan's favor.
But every time Hannah-chan sees these kind of controls, he's happy to try and get that engine developing because he's decided this is the round that I'm going to try and develop this Greatsword Longship combo. So he sees the removal and he pulls the Greatsword out with the Resurrect. Although he doesn't have access to any more boats. He's not got those Corsairs, we're not seeing Pirate Captains, so it's going to be a little bit tricky for him to have more than one engine.
I like that Hannah-chan has not played the Ulrich yet. He knows that Cantarella has been played. He has total control over the spy game in this round 2. So whenever he wants, he can play the Ulrich and say, I can play till whenever you can hero path, basically. And it makes it so that Colomon doesn't know if he has to play for points or not. He can't. If Ulrich is played early on, then Colomon knows he doesn't have to play optimally. He can play more towards maybe round 3 and setting up a better situation for himself. So in this case, Hannah-chan very smart, saving that Ulrich till maybe the very end, maybe the next turn or this turn even. And that way, making Colomon have to play in the shadow of doubt a bit.
I think Colomon does have to be a little bit careful. This Ale is going to make that Guardian even bigger. That is now a 15-point target. And with Renew and Coral, we saw a Coral onto a 9. There's an option of a Coral there onto a 15, and that that's a much nicer play. These are the tall units that Coral really loves. So by playing the Ale there, although I guess he didn't have a huge amount of choice in terms of what his hand was like, it does play into Hannah-chan's strategy a little bit.
This might just be we see Skjall into Herald Hounds now. Could be a risky play keeping that till later because it could be dead in round 3 if you go for the mulligan and end up drawing out. There aren't any other cursed units. Ulrich has been played and there aren't obviously any Marauders in this deck. It's a very different deck from the boats Skellige we've seen before. And here's Mandrake, pretty early. I'm surprised it did come out this early, but there's a big tempo swing here and just a big point gap right now between both players. I'm
wondering if Colomon is maybe trying to force Hannah-chan into a situation where Hannah-chan has to pass for fear of the hero pass, but we see that Herald coming out, and with the Jenga in hand, Hannah-chan can quite easily kill both of those skulls, and if Colomon doesn't do anything about the skull on his side, then Wilfred, Wilhelm, and Wilmar are coming out to party.
Always Vilgefortz, always a correct option, but using Vilgefortz where you're being bled in round 2, where you're so many points ahead still, doesn't always feel so good.
No, it's one of these cards that can often decide the game, so spending it in a round where ultimately Hannah-chan can kind of choose to leave is kind of scary.
We might see a Novice into Swallow Potion as well, into boosting that skull, could be an option.
Yeah, we see Roach coming out for Colomon, so Asir never really had the option to put that back into his deck, unfortunately. It's a play that you like to see, but you need to play the gold cards round 1, and Colomon has been holding on to his gold cards, so interesting to see how he'll choose to utilize the Asir, whether he'll choose to cycle his own cards or cycle his opponent's cards and try and deny that graveyard, because if he wins this, he can then put the Jenga back into the deck of Hannah-chan and try and deny any sort of resurrect options.
And here Hannah-chan doing the math, making sure to stay in this round, trying to get the Greatsword just a tiny bit bigger, going for the shortest round 3 as possible. And he still has the Renew, still has the possibility for drawing cards like Sigdrifa in round 3, so he still has a few cards left in his deck that could really pull him, win him the game if he top decks them. Yeah,
I think the access to the draw is something that Hannah-chan really wants. But the thing is, it kind of comes down to, does Colomon play Asir here? Because if Colomon can hold on to Asir, he can deny that graveyard. So even trying to draw into something like Sigurdrifa doesn't become so beneficial. And then his alternative is Coral. But as we've seen, like Coral in a short round with not very big targets isn't going to be so powerful.
And Colomon thinking what to play here. Sire can mess with the opponent's game plan and maybe win you the game. Whereas Vilgefortz is almost always guaranteed value in round 3 where you have such small units like Novices, but he's going to go for a Sire here. Going to play this out early. We're going to see what he chooses to do, either benefit his own game plan or mess with his opponents. Going to mess with his opponents, it seems. He's an aggressive fellow. Yeah,
the choice of the Pirate Captain is because he's worried about Restore. Hannah-chan doesn't currently have Restore, but if he draws into it, that is the perfect play, because Restore onto a 1 point brings it up to an 8, and that can be a lot of tempo, even if you don't have big greatswords.
And here's Hannah-chan's pass, probably coming in. There isn't really a gold card here that will do it for him, I believe. Longship will take, but Greatsword is done ticking for this turn. And there's still a big point cap. Even with Coral, I think it's definitely not worth it. So we're going to go into a round 3 where Coral, isn't going to be the greatest option, I think, for the Renew. There isn't going to be any buffing going on with Ales or with Swallow Potion, and there normally aren't any big units after the Guardian and the Sire have been played already for Colomon. So probably going to see Dandelion Poet, and the top deck situation is very important here. The Golem is not what you want, neither is the Swallow Potion, and that's a very nice gold hand for Coleman right there.
Yeah, it's a nice gold hand, but the one concern I guess I have is that what's he going to Vilgefortz?
You can't just Vilgefortz a Novice. He did put an Ointment back into the deck, so Novice into Ointment into maybe... I mean, you can't Viper Witcher really because there isn't a target right now. Having to play Proactive for Coleman, having lost round 1.
Yeah.
But you do have the Novice target, as long as you don't boost it with Swallow Potion or anything like that.
Should be okay. It's a tricky one. Like he's considering, I think he's maybe considering the Black Blood, but if you build something tall, you're then committing to burning a 6, and burning a 6 isn't ever something you really want to do with Vilgefortz because it really impacts his value.
This is the powerful Alchemy synergy we were talking about in round 3. A great finisher with Vesemir and with Vilgefortz as well. We'll have to see what Vilgefortz pulls later on, but Novice into Novice. He did pull back an Ointment, and there's a Swallow Potion onto the 6, denying the Coral value as well if Hannah-chan was going for that, but I think the Poet value will be better instead.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough for Hannah-chan. Like Hannah-chan, he doesn't have the Resurrect options for the Jenga. He doesn't really have the Developed Graveyard because of how Coleman played this game. And he doesn't have the cards he needs. There's no Restore. Even if there was a Restore, there's no Boat. I absolutely love the way that Coleman's played this. He's played this so cleanly, and he really understands this matchup.
Poet into Sigdrifa could be a thing, but it's Poet into Golem, and that is not what we want to see. This might just be a game deciding for Coleman in this case. Corsair into Ship in a 3-card or a 2-card round 3 is not ideal in any way when you're playing Great Swords. You want to have those resurrections into the huge Great Swords, but Coleman did a great job of denying it. Vilgefortz being played here for 7 points, plus whatever he draws, which could be probably a Alchemy Bronze maybe, or we'll see in just a second.
He's got the Black Blood.
That's a very good target. Ghoul into whatever Great Sword there was, it's not there anymore.
I think it's into Udalryk. Delicious Udalryk. This is the thing.
It was, I think, yeah, probably Udalryk or the Jenga Fret there, but yeah, Hannah-chan knows he lost there. It wasn't a favorable matchup, and Coleman did a good job of really, excelling with the Viper Witcher, stalling what he could in round 1, and then denying all of Hannah-chan's finishers in round 3. Hannah-chan, of course, also got a bit unlucky with his draws. No Sigdrifa, the Golem as well. Corsair not great in a 2-card round 3. So in the end, I think just Coleman had the better matchup there, and he ended up tying the game on Blue Coin. So we see 2 Blue Coin winners. We saw Blue Coin winners in the last series as well. I guess Blue Coin is a popular thing to play on now.
I think a lot of it comes down to understanding your decks and when you want to play your decks, and a little bit preempting your opponent in terms of what decks they're going to bring, because Hannah-chan, he was on red. He could have opted to go full test, but opted to go for the Crack and Crate deck there, which played into a very favorable matchup for Coleman.
We'll see what Coleman decides to bring now on red coin. He does have the option for King full test once again, or he has the option to bring out the Shoop. We haven't seen a Shoop yet. We'll have to see. I mean, it's normally going to be pretty similar to other Shoops. There is I think a set deck list that most pros are using because it's just the optimal deck list to use. There's a few variations in the bronze package. A bronze or 2 are exchanged depending on what matchups you think you want to target more. But generally, it's the silver package is very similar. Gold package also has some changes, but in general, it's very similar between all the Shoop decks.
Yeah, and we see a little bit of a delay getting into this next match, but I think it's quite likely that Coleman is going to be running that King full test on the red coin. That kind of deck does really struggle on blue. It's a deck where you're attacking your opponents. You do have blue striped scouts and these proactive plays that you need, but
you do see the Brewer instead.
Yeah.
Brewer, I think it's an option, but Great Swords into Brewer. I think Hannah-chan, maybe on blue coin he will not have the edge, but if there's a matchup that Hannah-chan wanted to see, it's going to be Great Swords into Shoop, I think. Shoop has some removal, but it's not catered towards targeting Great Swords. And Great Swords, if you can't stop it, it's a pretty powerful deck, even on blue coin.
Yeah, I think the success of Brewer into Great Swords kind of comes down to your starting hand. The Panther is really nice to see because you can take out a Greatsword once it's been ticked down from 8 to 7. Ida, also really nice to see. Alzur's Thunder, Decoy, we can use that to play her again. So there are good options, but a Glace is terrible because the only special card in Hannah-chan's deck is Restore.
It's not every day you mulligan a gold card, but in this case we saw it. Coleman does not want anything to do with a Glace in this matchup. He says, see you later, please don't come back again. And we're going to have to see what Hannah-chan opens up with. There's always the option to dry pass on blue coin. It's always, in some matchups, it's definitely the correct thing to do. Others, you have to give it a bit more thought. Shoop doesn't really have the benefit in a long round. There isn't really. It's more of a linear game plan where you just have points over points over points. But it does have the benefit in a short round.
Yeah, and Shoop also, it gives you quite a lot of options. There's 15 different things that Shoop can do. So whether you need to draw a card, whether you need to clear weather, whether you need to have a little bit of carryover, maybe you want to fight something, remove it from the board. There's so many options in Shoop, but at the same time, those options are tied to chance a little bit. So whether you find the Shoop that you're looking for, it remains to be seen.
And Hannah-chan opening up with Herald Houndsnout. Colamon, this archer can target the units on your own board, similar to the Tursek archer in Skellige. Not all damaging units can, but this one is a special one, I guess. CDPR let it slide, and this archer will go for that one instead. Going to damage the back row, and going to give, no bear to Hannah-chan. The bear remains in the zoo. No bear being played here.
I think that's a fair play. Hannah-chan, he does have Jenga in hand. Interesting that he's included Jenga in this deck, as it does block the Kraken Crate from targeting greatswords. But when you have Jenga in hand, the Kraken Crate then picks up the greatsword. So he does have an option for a little bit of a bigger greatsword, and that is something that players like if they can keep it out of range of removal. Things like Panther, for example, only hitting a 7. If you have a strengthened greatsword, not so great. But on the flip side, if it gets hit down to a 9, Ida and her Alzur's Thunder are going to be happy to remove that from the board.
And Colamon has Bruver as a leader. We saw a few changes in the last patch where he cannot access Yavin any longer. He can access Vadermaker, for example, though, so he does still have an available leader to play at some point if he needs that removal instantly, with a little bit of a 4-point boost to the tempo as well.
Yeah, the tempo with the Bruver into the Barclay, potentially into the Dwarven Agitator, into another Dwarf, is quite a nice option if you need to create yourself a little bit of wiggle room. But with the state of the board currently, I think Colamon isn't so worried.
We see a Spearmaid in here helping with this, tempo, and with this a little bit of a thinning as well, helping you get a more consistent result with your deck. We used to see 3 Pirate Captains, but those at some point could get bricked with the restores, and just in general, in round 3 you found yourself some games where you auto-lost because they were bricked. Spearmaiden adds a bit more of a different solution to thinning, but still thinning nonetheless, and still adding those extra points.
Yeah, and she also is a viable restore target. So even though you're giving up a Pirate Captain, you're not giving up restore value. So it is a nice inclusion, and I understand why some players use it.
There we see the first zap coming out. We're going to see a lot of those this game. A lot of removal, a lot of options for Colamon to try and control Hannah-chan's game plan, which is a dangerous one. I mean, long shifts and greatswords. Once you get them on the board, it's 6 points every 2 turns. That is scary. That is Ragnarok levels of scary. Well, a little bit less than Ragnarok, but it gets there.
Yeah, it does definitely start adding up. But Colamon, he has a lot of answers. He does have the decoy. He can use that to replay Ida, and also Shoop on Shoop Knight has an access to a decoy, as well as a deal 15 damage. So, if Colamon really needs to roll removal off of Shoop, he's very, very likely to see it.
You've got the heart.
Hannah-chan playing out his leader here. Big tempo swing, getting that 10-point greatsword as well, which could dodge some removal, but can't dodge all removal. And at 9 points, we might see Bruver coming down, trying to get rid of that with the Vadermaker option. Also making sure the Bruver isn't dead later on, and getting rid of that greatsword. Stalling for time, once again, like we saw last game.
Yeah, this is exactly what Hannah-chan's trying to do, just develop the board. We see him hovering the decoy there and considering just replaying the Ida. Out she comes, Alzur's Thunder once again. This is the thing with the Shoop deck, is it doesn't necessarily look like it has a lot of options. But the thing is, you have Triss Telekinesis, you have Vadermaker, you have Ida, you have Decoy, you have Shoop, you have Sage, you have Panther. There's more removal than you would expect initially. And depending on, what Colamon draws, he could potentially just completely shut down Hannah-chan's engine.
So yet another greatsword being played here. We're going to see a lot of that happening in this game, which is what you normally tend to do with these decks. You play the greatswords, you let them get hit by the long shiv, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger every turn if they're not checked. But Colamon is doing a very good job of checking them, sending them straight to the graveyard and restarting that process every single time, stalling for more and more time, where time is just what this deck thrives on. I mean, if you give it a very long round, it's going to start getting 6 and then 8 and then 12 points a turn, and then you don't know what you're doing. You have to just forfeit. But at this point, Colamon keeping a very good control of those greatswords, making sure they're not getting out of control.
Yeah, and these last 2 games, Colamon's strategy basically seems to be see a greatsword, kill a greatsword, see a greatsword, kill a greatsword, and this actually isn't going to kill a greatsword.
Yep, Skirmisher's a bit of a might hit crack here. You don't want to hit the greatsword obviously because those are points that you just lose, and then we see it crack being hit. An okay tempo swing, getting rid of some of these bronzes that they're okay. They're not, it's not synergetic. It's not cards you want to see in round 3. It's not cards you want to keep for later. These are cards you want to get rid of, get the value from them, which tends to be 12 points or so with Squaitell, and still stay ahead. Even cards in Colamon, because he was on red coin, able to really put the pressure on Hannah-chan, keeping control of these greatswords, and also staying in this game.
Yeah, and I think Coleman, he actually feels quite comfortable in this round. He does have the Elven Mercenary there, and she's going to be pulling, I believe, Mardrome, which is going to completely shut down the only longship that Hannah-chan has managed to keep on the board. So Coleman, he's kind of fine with this longship getting bigger and bigger, because when he wants to, he can make that tempo play and shut it down. He's also got the Brewer tempo play, so he's in a fairly solid position in this first round.
And the Panther would be great here, but because of Hannah-chan, he's read through his opponent's deck list, he's studied every single possible interaction, and he knows he has to stack on that back row. There are no lacerates, there are no bombers, and he knows that he can't deny this one Panther value. So Panther's great when it can have its full effect, but in this case it would be completely bricked. Coleman also knows this. He's going to go maybe for the Brewer, get rid of one of these great swords, or maybe just the Elven Merc into the Mardrome, like you said, or the Recon even.
Yeah, there's a party on the back row, and Panther is not invited, but apparently there's some mushrooms kicking about because that Mardrome has just shut down that longship.
And one greatsword finally does get strengthened. It's been, a few turns till we got here, but Hannah-chan finally gets that first strength in there, but the second one might not survive. If Brewer comes down for Vadermaker, that second greatsword will be bye-bye. And it'll only be one 10-point greatsword, which isn't game-winning, really.
And we see Scowl coming out and opting to get that Udalric, get that card draw. And the option is Resurrect or Heim.
And Heim here will find targets to create from his opponent's silver list, so that it's very much an option, even though we've seen Udalric, Skjall, and Herald Houndstone all played, so he can't thin curse units from your own deck, but you can always create. In some cases, you don't have any silver units, so it's kind of brick. You have to get rid of it. Same with the Glyce in this matchup specifically, but because Coleman does have the Hattori, the Ida, the Vadermaker, there's a ton of silver units where you can get value there.
Yeah, and Hannah-chan, he's played all his curse units, so he's not going to be able to thin a curse, but like you said, there are a lot of options, and Coleman opting to pass. He's had enough of this round, having seen that spy.
He's played around the spy, basically. He doesn't have his own spy to answer, so he can't really play into this round unless he wants to risk getting surpassed by, with two greatswords on the board and a long ship, it starts getting a little bit risky. He gives up the round, gives up control of round one, and really the last say in round three as well.
But I do really like the Jenga there, playing the Jenga onto that greatsword that was about to strengthen and basically strengthening his own greatsword a little bit. Like, yes, it was a big play in terms of points, but he's investing in the future. And I think it was quite smart from Hannah-chan.
We do see Shoop in hand for Coleman, so he has that at least. That is a very important thing to have. Panther there, he does mulligan it away. It could be good, but I think Hannah-chan knows he can play around it, and he's going to go for just the mulligan instead.
Yeah, Hannah-chan definitely having to play into this round, regardless of whether he wanted to or not. Sitting with Renew and 3 golds in hand, you don't want a dead Renew in round 3. But ultimately, I think he wants to develop that greatsword just a little bit more. And with the Corsair, the Pirate Captain in hand, he can go for more boats, or he can go for a Corsair and resurrect a boat.
But he's giving Coleman the chance to catch up and maybe go a card up into round 3.
That is true, and Shoop does equate to a lot of points. So, along with Brewer, so I don't know if Hannah-chan's necessarily going to be able to reach the point here where he can choose to pass and keep that card advantage. We see the boat there poking that greatsword once more. 11 points, difficult to remove. Coleman, he does have the the boosted Sword Master in hand. Sword Master, she deals damage based on her power, so he does have removal options, but none of the targets are big enough.
We do also have the Brewer into Vadermaker still as an option for that Thunder, but again, you can get rid of the Longship but not the Greatsword. I think the Greatsword is the real target here. Or never mind, it's going to be the Longship instead, because the Greatsword is just too big. It's at 11 points. It's going to tick this turn, so you don't have a chance to double damage it, and that 14-point Greatsword, if it grows a little bit more, it might be a problem in round 3.
Yeah, especially with Hannah-chan, he's got the Corsair in hand. He can get that Resurrect. I think with Coleman, he's realized I'm not in control and I can't deal with the Greatsword. So this is the point where I have to start dealing with the boats while they're small. Like Coleman, he's kind of between a rock and a hard place. When you get a Greatsword that big, this is when they start to get out of control. We saw what happened when he could control them, but this is starting to look like this round is slipping out of his hands.
And the Agitator can pull a Mercenary still, I believe that and the Mahakam Guard as well. So 2 options there for the Agitator. It is not bricked, which is an important thing, because that 1-point bronze being bricked is sometimes, game losing for sure. Coleman definitely making sure he has the mental count in his head. And once again, we see the Longship coming down and another poke of damage on that Greatsword.
And Coleman is really going to have to start investing some points if he wants to keep up with this engine. He's 10 points to 32, 22 points down. He does have some big plays in his hand, but he's been opting to kind of play it more slowly so far, and it's starting to get to the point where maybe Hannah-chan's just going to go for the 2-0. Yeah,
Coleman is really, pensive face here, really thinking what to do now. what's the best line of play, how to play around Hannah-chan trying to get this strong finisher in round 3 while still staying so far ahead in points in round 2, where he's not really pressured into maybe losing a card to Coleman, because Coleman is 22 points behind. That's a lot of points.
Yeah, it may actually come down to the renew in Hannah-chan's hand, whether Hannah-chan can kind of stay in this round long enough, because that is a dead card until a gold card goes to his graveyard. That is worth no points. And we see Ida coming out there. The Hattori was boosted by 1, so it was able to then resurrect the Ida onto the Zap, and Hannah-chan's like, right, I can't, set this engine back up a 3rd time, so I'm out.
There's a great pass there. The Dandelion Poet does enable the renew for later, for round 3. And it's always going to be a good thing, Dandelion Poet. It's not going to be dead. It's always going to be 5 points to plus whatever you have, which is going to be probably the Reds. Let's say Grifa or Freya on this Greatsword. So Hannah-chan, I think, quite happy. He has a pretty decent hand. I mean, 3 goals is, I'd say pretty decent, especially with Sigrifa still in your deck. Whereas Coleman has Shoop, he has his leader, but he also has, an 8-point Swordmaster, and, well, Isengrim is a pretty good pull as well. Corsair there from Hannah-chan, gonna risk it.
I mean, Hannah-chan, it's quite comfortable for him also because he has that renew into the Poet, so he can try and find the tools he needs. So even if he maybe doesn't draw the most powerful card in this situation, he should be able to find something within his deck, whether that be, the Restore or the Sigurdrifa. At this point, there's only 5 cards left.
Now Coleman has to go a bit proactive here, having to play first. He does have a Swordmaster and Shoop, which are normally reactive plays. Isengrim could be proactive if you go into the create section and try and find something like a Teruvial, for example. And also the Barclay Elves if you get the Mahakam Guard. Could be not, well, it's been played already, so only have the Mercenary left, which is also a proactive play. So. And
Coleman, he doesn't really have choice with Isengrim. He has to go into that create option because Decoy, Marjoram, and Recon have all been played this game, so no special cards there. We see him opt instead for the Barclay off the Brewer, and again buffing those gold cards, denying that Coral.
And 20 points is great from a leader, but 17 points from a bronze is also quite decent. Although, Hannah-chan has been gearing up towards this moment the whole game, basically.
Yeah, I don't think it's something to turn your nose up at. With that said, is Coral going to really find that much value?
Coleman could risk it here. Could try and charm.
Ooh.
But is that a big risk? I think that's maybe too much of a risk.
I mean, it's not the decider. So Shoop on Mage has the option to try and charm an opponent, and it's a random opponent. So here's a 50-50 of whether you get 2 points or whether you get 32 points. So, nah, he's opting for the...
A Hattori here could be great. Obviously, Aileron is not the option. Aileron at 6 points is not what you want to see in a round 3 when you're trying to play the maximum amount of points as possible. Passing and bluffing does not, come into play in round 3. It's just about points.
Yeah, but what can Coleman resurrect? It depends really whether he's still got some dwarfs in his deck, I would think. Although actually he's got plenty of zaps, so he can go for the save.
He does have 1 mercenary left as well, so that's the option there from the Agitator. And again, a pretty decent gold play. 37 points, not too bad.
37 to 17, but 1 card down. This is a nail biter, and again, you see in terms of the units that are getting moved, it's gold cards. We just are blocking Coral.
Restore is a perfect pull for the Dandelion Poet. So Hannah-chan really getting the absolutely fantastic, most optimal plays I think he could have gotten. The Restore definitely better than Sigrifa. And this is, Coleman is not liking what he's seeing at all.
No, I think Hannah-chan, he's going to be delighted to see that. He has restored his position in this matchup. And 41 to 37, 2 cards. Shoop and Swordmaster versus Coral and Heim.
And Hannah-chan looking proud as a peacock after that play. That was probably the best play you could have expected from Dandelion Poet. He set it up last turn by playing the Dandelion Poet and having the renew option this turn, and the Swordmaster isn't enough to kill the vote. It's really everything's going well for Hannah-chan here.
And what that means is that Greatsword is going to be getting greater and greater, and it really just comes down to Shoop and how Coleman chooses to implement this card.
We'll see what he gets here, trying to get max amount of points. He needs them. Hunter normally has the best options if you want to get risky, I believe. We'll see what Coleman decides to go for here. He's played this deck a lot. He knows his options. He definitely knows all 15 different options. And he's thinking about the board state, thinking about his opponent's deck and what could really favor him here.
Yeah, Knight, it can strengthen to 25. Hunter, it can do up to 15 damage, but 15 damage on a 17-point Greatsword, that guy's just going to heal right back up. You can do 8 damage 2 times, but again, if you hit the Greatsword, not so great. And Shoop Knight, also the option to duel an opponent, so potentially could, turn the tide of this.
Coleman goes for the Knight here, the 12-point card coming down, and just goes up just a 25-point gold, which is very decent. Greatsword will heal here. Longship will also tick, And this Heim will probably pull into Vader Maker for a very decent 13 points.
Ooh, it's so close.
And that Greatsword will heal, but it won't heal
It's
enough
not
by 1 point.
enough.
Coleman takes it with a perfect read of the shoot there. It looked like Hannah-chan was definitely going to win this. He had the optimal Dandelion Poet into the restore, into the 9-point long shoot that couldn't be killed by the Swordmaster, but in the end, Shoop too strong.
That Shoop was super. Really clutch there, getting the perfect draw at the perfect time. Like Shoop, it's a little bit of a wild card. It can be, as we saw, as powerful as that 25 points, but sometimes, you don't find the options that you need. Opting for Knight, there could have been Resilience, he could have had Jewel, he could have killed all of the units smaller than 4, which is very rarely useful unless we're playing soldiers. There's a lot of options there, and he got the right one.
And we might see a mirror here between these two King Foltest lists. Very similar, only difference is Coleman is running Trebuchets instead of Siege Towers, 2 of those instead of 2 Siege Towers. But other than that, identical lists. And mirrors, I think, no Gwent player likes playing them. They're always, it comes down to the draw, to the coin, to the factors that, are out of the reach of just the deck and the game plan. And sometimes, the skill of the opponent sometimes also matters, but in this stage with 2, fantastic players like Coleman and Hannah-chan, I think the skill, it's going to be more, the bricks, the draws, the commandos, for example. And we don't see a mirror, thank God, because I don't like them. We see instead the Foltest coming from Coleman, his last deck that he needs to win to get to the final. And Hannah-chan trying it again on the Greatsword.
I think that's fair play by Hannah-chan. Getting this win, I think, is going to be a lot more manageable this round. Although with that said, we do see Vernon, Roche and Selkirk or Goulet in the hands of Coleman. So Coleman, he's got some removal options and actually Death Mold, so maybe he's going to do it again.
Yeah, and there's no weather from the Skellige deck, so Death Mold is not needed for a clear. We saw against Dagon that you have to kind of preserve that to be able to clear weather later on and save possibly a ton of points in a very long round. But in this case, Death Mold is a killing machine instead. Going to be zapping either a ship or a Greatsword. Possibly we're going to see a kind of a repeat of what we saw earlier with Alchemy, where Coleman tries to stall this out as much as possible. He is on blue coin, so he will be playing kind of the reactive, trying to stay alive in this round kind of position, not the pressuring one. And you're going to start by thinning out, with the scouts and commandos, just trying to use this Temerian synergy to his advantage.
Yeah, Foltest is not usually the deck you want to be playing on blue coin because you don't have that spy. Your opponent, has a spy if they're not running the same list. So it's one of those ones that really does prefer the red coin. But it's Coleman's last deck. At this point, he doesn't have a choice, and he does have 2 shots at it. So he's probably not feeling too nervous in this situation. I do think Hannah-chan with Greatswords is finally in a more favorable position, but that's not to say that Coleman won't overcome it.
Not only a spy, he also has a chance to play spies with tutors.
Yep.
Both Dandelion Poet and Skjold are options. Luckily for us, Heim isn't in his hand, or we might see a full-on travesty. But in this case, he's going to start with the Longship engines first. Also thinning with the Damoon Pirate captain. And also, you could play Skjold, but it's a 50-50 between the Herald Houndsnout and the Udalryk. So it's a risky play.
The spy isn't guaranteed based on Hannah-chan's hand, but the spy doesn't exist in Coleman's hand, so it's an interesting one. That boat on the board, 9 points within Alza's Thunder range. So potentially something you could hit, not in Vernon range. Vernon only does 7. Vernon probably reserved for Greatswords. But I think Coleman, we've seen from Coleman, he likes to kill the Greatswords. He doesn't like to kill the boats. So I think he's just going to let that boat chill until we start to see some Greatswords. And again, Jenga in hand.
Jenga in hand, Greatsword coming down. And he knows not to zap it immediately because it might get killed by the Death Mold, because it will be going down to 9 if it was, pinged by the ship. Instead, leaves it alive there for at least a little bit longer. Also, Selkirk can do an 11, so gives you a bit more where your Thunder doesn't reach, Selkirk does, so you have that extra little space to stall.
That is true, but with the 1 Resurrect in Hannah-chan's hand, if Coleman opts to take that Greatsword out, it can just come straight back. And it's quite nice because it's the 10, it's a little bit safer. So Coleman going to have far fewer options to remove it, I think, if any, once he's used that Selkirk.
There's a great battering ram target as well. You have the 4, you can hit the 11 as well if you're not going to be, if you intend to not obviously Scorch or Mandrake the boat, which isn't an option in Coleman's Foltest list. It's very, do your own thing, thin your own deck, and then play your own finishers. You don't really have that much control in terms of tall units. You don't have any Scorch or Villain Treadermirth like we saw yesterday, or even cards like Mandrake, for example.
Oh, and Coleman coming down to the wire here. Thinking about playing that Selkirk, thinking about dealing with that Greatsword, but realizing that actually he can kind of delay it a little bit, although this does open up the Heimei for Hannah-chan.
And now Hannah-chan's putting the pressure on Coleman. He has 2 Greatswords in play, both damaged. And Coleman has to start saying, I have to start taking these down. Death Mold is a good option now for that 9. It's about to turn and strengthen. I think it's the correct option. Colamon will probably go for it. And then Vernon Roche for the next one. The next turn, that's I think might be the lines of play that he might be going for here, because they are the optimal lines of play, I believe. If you want to evade these Great Swords from strengthening, which I definitely think is Colamon's strategy. We saw it before with Alchemy, and I think we're going to see it again with this full test list.
Yeah, I really like that sudden switch away from the Selkirk, because Selkirk, it gives you more reach in terms of the size of the greatsword, and that sudden switch, Colamon realized, hey, I've got a little bit of space here, it's not going to tick just yet, so instead what I can choose to do is just play my full test and then wait for that death mold rather than utilizing the Selkirk so early.
Unfortunately for Colamon, that is a 6-point greatsword, not a 5. If not, he could have used that crewman pocket in the back row with the scouts and just ping that down with the battering ram, but in this case we're going to see the Vernon Roche instead, definitely in range, can also pull the commando. And still Colamon not only denying Hannah-chan's strategy, but also staying 20 points ahead against a deck that has a long ship and has great swords ticking. That's impressive.
Yeah, Hannah-chan has a lot of points to catch up here. Like he's not feeling so hot, I would think, at this point. And Colamon also managed to thin all of those commandos out of his deck, so going to be drawing into more and more favorable cards. With that said, if he passes here, he does lose that triple crewman pocket we see on the back row, the blue stripe scouts plus the full test. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see just how long this goes on. And I think probably until Colamon runs out of options for the greatswords.
I think he'll have to use these battering rams now, maybe, unless he wants to, he has the Selkirk still as an option, which it's a good one, but it's hard, like you said before. You want to maybe save that for later in some cases. It depends how much he wants to win this round 1.
The difficulty for him is that he could double battering ram the 10 and that's going to kill it, but by doing that you're allowing the 7 to strengthen. He doesn't really have great ways here to deal with 2 greatswords. He only has options to deal with 1 greatsword, so it's starting to get a little bit tricky, and I think that 10 is the priority just because once that starts getting damaged, that's going to be getting bigger, whereas the 7, it's not quite as powerful. It hasn't grown as much. It's maybe a little great sword. So we'll see how this goes.
We go for the ship instead. Going to just ignore those great swords both at 10 points, and now the Hannah-chan starts piling down these ships a bit late. They're not going to get the full value you could have gotten if you would have started playing them much earlier. Being engine units, you want to play them early so they reap points over points over points every single turn. But when you play them 6 or 7, or in this case about 8 turns into round 1, it's not always ideal. But there is a lot of sequencing to keep into account, and Hannah-chan, I think, he knows how to play this deck much better than me, so definitely not gonna diss him at all.
I think he just didn't have a choice with how much removal was going on, but now he can start to employ them. But with that said, he's on red coin. He's going second, so he doesn't necessarily have to get those points going as quickly as possible because he always has a little bit of room to catch up. So Hannah-chan, I think he's been playing this really cleanly, and Colamon, like I said, he's running out of options for those greatswords, and what does he do here?
It's sad to see those crewman pockets go to waste, but every turn you play into this where you can't remove the great swords, you're just letting them strengthen and strengthen. He does still have the Selkirk. He decides to use it to stall for a little bit more time and stay in this for just a tiny bit longer. And there's a big point, guy. I mean, 30 points is nothing to scoff at.
No, 30 points is nothing to scoff at. But Hannah-chan, can he overcome this with 2 cards, actually? I'm not sure that he can.
He can try with Herald, Houndsnout, Gengi, if it's uncontested, if Colamon does pass. That is a very big swing with Skjold. If he gets the Herald, he might just get the Ulrich, and then
Colamon will pass.
That would be troublesome. He gets the Herald.
And if he's putting on the engine, it means he wants to Jenga it. Colamon, though, he does have some options to answer these. He does have options to answer these skulls in that he can kill one and trigger the effect already, denying the skull on his side, the Wilmar. However, in doing that, you're also then just hitting all of your units on the back row, and that back row is stacked.
I think with this greatsword ticking up now and no clear answer to deal with it, and this Herald Houndsnout also pressuring him, it may be a pass from Colamon. He wants to be able to retain card advantage going into round 3. He doesn't have a spy to answer back, and he goes for the pass. I think it's a safer option. He's stalled for long enough. I mean, he's taken this round 1, 7 or 8 turns in, so it's definitely impressive when the highest greatsword is only at 12 points. Hannah-chan goes for the very easy pass here with or very easy points pass with the Jenga Fret being played, and a very impressive lead here in just 1 card, but that's how the combo works if uncontested. And easy round 1 for Hannah-chan in terms of the points, but not so easy in terms of control of the game, where Colamon was able to deal with a lot of his greatswords.
The problem for Colamon is that Hana-chan is now in the driving seat. And Hana-chan, he has some options, he has some big targets, and Colamon, there's not huge numbers of finishers. I mean, you have the Dijkstra, that's a really great round 3, but Hana-chan might just try and push him and bleed it out in this turn and just try and set up those greatswords once again. And the thing for Colamon is he's running out of options. He does have the Shani, he can resurrect the Death Mold, but I mean, how big are the greatswords at this point?
I mean, you have infantry as well for Colamon, so you do still have some very big tempo swings and a very decent hand as well. Shani and DJ both drawn, so all his golds are here. Hana-chan does not risk it, goes for the pass instead, trying to get maximum value from his long ships. He has 2 Corsairs in hand, so the longer the round is, the better. Doesn't want to waste those points in a short round 2. Instead, goes straight to round 3 and says, come at me, bro. What do you have? Do you have better cards than me? We'll see in just a second. Romid comes down, a little bit of carryover and the crewman synergy for the round 3, and both players now really relying on what they are able to draw and what DJ draws, and Stennis, for example, for Colamon.
Yeah, throwing the Corsair and getting a captain, that's always a mulligan that you love to see, because the captain can draw a Corsair, so you just added at least a point to that play. Coral, though,
not the greatest card right now. I mean, Romid has been played. There aren't really any big units, no siege towers in this list, so we see the infantry come down immediately, thinning these out and making sure that the DJ doesn't do anything bad to Colamon's chances of winning.
That is true. Colamon, he does have access to 9 points of damage, so if he can get 3 points onto that greatsword, then he can actually kill it. But Hana-chan does have more resurrects in hand, so Colamon has to kind of decide whether he feels like shutting that down is within his best interests, or whether he'd rather save that trebuchet and use it for more points once things are lined up, but accepting the fate and leaving the greatsword.
I like that Hana-chan played the greatsword first. It guarantees the ping from the longship if it doesn't survive more than 1 round, and I think he knows that Shani is a possibility into the Death Mold, for example, so I think he knows the longship, the first one at least, might not survive, so he does lose 1 point by not playing the longship first, but also guarantees a tick on the greatsword, and 11 points of damage is hard to deal with if you don't have Selkirk, which was already played in round 1 for Colamon.
Yeah, we see the marching orders coming out from Colamon, a tactical play. Vader Maker is definitely something Colamon wants to see. Alza's Thunder onto that greatsword. This tells Hana-chan that Colamon is going to kill that next round. He has plans. He
has the battering rams in the graveyard as well, so that's an option if you need to do damage. And at 3 points, that greatsword is very vulnerable.
Yeah, he also has plenty of machines in his deck and a Dijkstra that he can go fishing for should he need them.
I wouldn't know. I don't think I would put that up to chance. I think at this point, trying to secure a ticket to the final, trying to win his first tournament, I think Colamon's going to play as safe as possible to some extent, where he can guarantee certain combos.
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. We see the Corsair coming out, that big boat coming down, and I think Hana-chan's realized, this greatsword is so small, it doesn't matter if I shoot it and make it smaller. It's not like I'm getting this into range for Colamon, like this greatsword is in range for Colamon, and the trebuchet coming down, going to hit the light longship and the greatsword, take the greatsword out and try and stop that engine.
I mean, you put it into range of the trebuchet, which made it, even easier. You don't even have to use a Shani or start doing some crazy stuff with DJ or Stennis. So I think it's correct because you do save the extra point. You're not pinging in a unit that you want to survive, but in the end, it makes it just a tiny bit easier for Colamon to be able to play that trebuchet from hand and getting rid of that greatsword.
Wondering what Hana-chan is going to draw here, and Udalryk, not something people like to see in the final round.
That is not a happy face from Hana-chan. Round 3 Udalryk is it has many uses for the newer viewers watching this event. It could get a bit confusing why you want to play a 13-point card on your opponent's side of the board, but this is definitely not the situation where you want to see Udalryk being played.
And you see him checking his graveyard, maybe considering that Harold for the Sigurdriff Red rather than the Jenga or a Greatsword, and just kind of figuring out his options here, because this is a very tricky point. With the Udalryk, I almost feel like he's going to have to play it regardless, so you may as well play it now.
Restored's good though, and it's a good coral target as well, so not all is lost, but definitely we saw optimal draws from Hana-chan last game. In this case, not so much. That is the luck you have in some of these games, some of these situations. So Hana-chan had a bit of luck last game, not so much this game, but still, I think he's still in this. He's 27 points behind, and DJ is threatening.
Yep.
But Restore is an option. Coral has a good target. Sigdrifa is always going to be strong on Jenga Fret, and the Corsair into a boat, is never a bad play.
And I think Hana-chan is likely at this stage to opt to just start developing those boats rather than just trying to get those greatswords, because greatswords, they take a little bit of time to start growing. It's 2 turns, whereas the boats, they're gaining 1 point every turn. So while it's not necessarily as powerful, in terms of long term. In the short term, at this stage of the game, I think it's the right play.
There's some okay trebuchet targets in the back row. Raw bit synergy as well for the extra, 2 damage. And now DJ, with 5 cards left, or with 4 cards left, I think Colomon has a pretty good idea of what he can pull there.
Yep, Colomon, he knows what's left in his deck. He's been thinning. This is the thing with Dijkstra, and this is why this deck doesn't necessarily run Spy in some ways, because you don't want to Dijkstra into a Spy. I mean, you don't really want to Poet into a Spy either.
And we see Shani probably going to come down this turn. Kanachan saving a point there. Well, really, he's not saving any points because that boat's going to die regardless of what he's doing. Well, he saved 1 point because that Longship is ticking onto something that's probably going to get zapped by this Shani Death Mold combo anyway. So, heads up play by Hanachan, but still going to probably lose out on that Longship. Shani coming out to play in just a second. And Dijkstra, maybe the decider at the very end there. And we see a huge point gap still, 30 points, 31 points. Not
a huge problem. I mean, he does have access to another ship. You've got that Restore typically used on a Pirate Captain into a Corsair. I mean, it depends really on the numbers in terms of what's in Hanachan's graveyard and what's in his deck as to how that's going to be played. But actually also Restore quite nice on Harold. Especially with Jenga as a Sigurd Drifter target. I think that's probably the line of play that he'll use.
We'll see in just a second. It normally is Pirate Captain if you have the right amount of Corsairs in graveyard and you can thin them out properly. There's a Coral coming out on Ulrich, the only real target, and still, I mean, Restore and Sigdrifa against Dijkstra with a 30-point gap. I think Colomon has this. I mean, he's going to have to get really unlucky with this pull here. There is no Spy in his deck, which is why Dijkstra gets a bit more consistency here. Probably going to see 2 machines coming out. We've seen most of the silver units already played.
Oh, what's it going to be? This is the thing. You're always
It's like a battering
curious.
ram first, targeting that Dijkstra for the 4 and 3 combo.
And it's quite funny. Previously, if you killed Dijkstra with the first card, you wouldn't actually draw the second card. A little bit of a change to Gwent, but this kind of play then gets opened up by that.
And we see a Trebuchet right after. It was covered up there by the graveyard. Hanachan not helping us out, but this is a big point gap. I mean, Restore is a great card, but come on. It's not that great. And Sigdrifa, you have a nice, a 12-point Greatsword or a 14-point Jenga Fret. I mean, Jenga Fret and the Herald Houndsnout combo is powerful.
It's powerful.
But is it this, with Longships taking, I mean, is it this powerful though? I'd be really surprised.
Oh, this is one of those situations where there's just, so much going on that it's hard to, I don't think it's this powerful. I think Colomon, this is Colomon's game to lose.
50-something point gap or a 40-something point gap. This is 40-something point gap is absolutely massive. 44 points.
44.
Come on, it's not that big. I mean,
no,
Greatsword
it's not
is
that
good,
big.
but not that great.
It can't be. There's no way. No way.
And this might just be, and the armor as well, they're ticking. We see the
11 points.
It's not enough. It's close though. It's closer than it should
close.
be. The score is a bit too OP there.
Plus the vote, and then Ronvid's like back to play.
Colomon seals the deal, punches his ticket to the final. Very relief face there from him. Both players, I think, happy with their performances. Hanachan played well. In the end, I think got a bit unlucky with the Ulrich in that last round of that game, but Colomon back into a final after challenger number 2. So this is way back in December in a challenger final against Freddy Babes.
Yep.
He ended up losing it. Now he has a chance to maybe redeem himself and get his first ever tournament win